Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The Justice Department's calling for a major overhaul of Ferguson's criminal justice system after finding systemic discrimination against African-American residents. A comprehensive report says police disproportionately stopped, arrested, and used force against blacks without reasonable suspicion, then acted as a collection agency to operate off their fines. Unveiling the probe's findings, outgoing Attorney General Eric Holder described how residents were targeted for arrests, then saddled with penalties.
Some officers even compete to see who can issue the largest number of citations during a single stop, a total that in at least one instance rose as high as 14. And we have observed that even minor code violations can sometimes result in multiple arrests, jail time, and payments that exceed the cost of the original ticket many times over. Now, for example, in 2007, one woman received 2 parking tickets that together totaled $152. To date, she has paid $550 in fines and fees to the city of Ferguson. She has been arrested twice for having unpaid tickets, and she has spent 6 days in jail. Yet today, she still inexplicably owes Ferguson $541.
The Justice Department report details many other examples of police harassment, abuse, and racial profiling of African Americans. Dogs were let loose only on blacks and sometimes without warning. One man was accused of being a pedophile for sitting in his car after playing basketball in a public park. After objecting to a car search, he was arrested at gunpoint on charges that ultimately cost him his job as a federal contractor. Other instances were found of taser attacks without cause and people called the N-word. Saying the racial bias was pervasive, Attorney General Holder demanded wholesale and structural corrective action.
Community where local authorities consistently approached law enforcement not as a means for protecting public safety, but as a way to generate revenue. A community where both policing and municipal court practices were found to be disproportionately harmful to African American residents. A community where this harm frequently appears to stem, at least in part, from racial bias, both implicit and explicit. Now that our investigation has reached its conclusion, it is time. It is time for Ferguson's leaders to take immediate, wholesale, and structural corrective action. Now, let me be very clear. The United States Department of Justice reserves all of its rights and abilities to force compliance and to implement basic change. Nothing is off the table.
The Justice Department says they'll take legal action if Ferguson does not comply with its demands, which include a, quote, shift from policing to raise revenue to policing in partnership with the entire Ferguson community. In a statement, the St. Louis-based Don't Shoot Coalition said, quote, now that the lived experience of our community being regularly targeted and harassed by law enforcement has been acknowledged, we hope the Ferguson Police Department will be brought to justice through a DOJ lawsuit that results in federal oversight. In response, Ferguson Mayor James Knowles said he's determined to address the issues raised by the probe, but did not say whether he'll comply with its demands. Mayor Knowles did announce the firing of a police supervisor found to have written racist emails and the suspension of 2 others.
Let me be clear. This type of behavior will not be tolerated in the Ferguson Police Department or in any department of the city of Ferguson. Immediately upon leaving that meeting, the 3 individuals were placed on administrative leave pending an investigation. 1 has since been terminated, and the other 2 are still awaiting the outcome of an internal investigation.
The probe has renewed calls for the dismissal of Ferguson Police Chief Tom Jackson, but Knowles did not comment on his future. In unveiling the findings on the Ferguson police, the Justice Department also confirmed police officer Darren Wilson will not face civil rights charges for the fatal shooting of unarmed African-American teenager Michael Brown last August. Holder said there's not enough evidence to support a prosecution.
The facts do not support the filing of criminal charges against Officer Darren Wilson in this case. Michael Brown's death, though a tragedy, did not involve prosecutable conduct on the part of Officer Wilson. Now, this conclusion represents the sound, considered, and independent judgment of the expert career prosecutors within the Department of Justice. I have been personally briefed on multiple occasions about these findings. I concur with the investigative team's judgment and the determination about our inability to meet the required federal standard.
Wilson avoided criminal prosecution after a grand jury declined to indict him in November. The Justice Department's rejection of federal civil rights charges against him comes just days after it reached the same conclusion for George Zimmerman, the Florida man who shot dead unarmed African-American teen Trayvon Martin 3 years ago this month in Florida. In a statement, Michael Brown's parents, Leslie McSpadden and Michael Brown Sr., said, quote, "While we're saddened by this decision, we're encouraged that the DOJ will hold the Ferguson Police Department accountable for the pattern of racial bias and profiling they found in their handling of interactions with people of color. It's our hope that through this action, true change will come, not only in Ferguson, but around the country. If that change happens, our son's death will not have been in vain," they wrote. In Syria, dozens of people are dead following a rebel attack on a government intelligence building in the embattled city of Aleppo. Jihadist groups, including the al-Qaeda-linked Nusra Front, have claimed responsibility. It comes just days after opposition fighters rejected a temporary truce in Aleppo, saying they won't accept any deal that keeps Bashar al-Assad in power. U.S. and Iranian negotiators have reported progress in their bid to reach a nuclear deal before a March 31st deadline. The talks will reconvene March 15th after concluding Wednesday. The advances come as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has returned to Israel following his trip to Washington seeking to stop the deal. Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif said while gaps remain, negotiators are resisting the pressure of warmongers and scaremongers.
We are not far from reaching an agreement. There are gaps that need to be filled, serious ones, but that doesn't mean that they are not, we are not capable of moving forward. We have one very serious problem, and that is there is a great deal of pressure that is being imposed by warmongers, by scaremongers, who are trying to prevent a deal by scaremongering tactics, by lying, by demagoguery, and that is an impediment to the necessary atmosphere that is required to reach a deal.
Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu sought to undermine the deal by speaking before Congress, which could potentially block any easing of U.S.-led sanctions under the potential agreement. The U.S. ambassador to South Korea has been attacked by a knife-wielding assailant during a public event in Seoul. Mark Lippert was preparing to give a lecture when he was slashed in the face, leaving him bloodied. The assailant reportedly shouted anti-war slogans denouncing ongoing military drills between the U.S. and South Korea. North Korea test-fired short-range missiles Monday as the drills began. North Korea's official news agency has praised the knife attack, calling it a, quote, expression of resistance. Ambassador Lippert tweeted he's doing well after being taken to the hospital and undergoing surgery. The Republican-controlled Senate's failed to override President Obama's veto of a measure approving construction of the Keystone XL pipeline. Obama rejected the bill last week to allow for the completion of a State Department review. And a former New Jersey environmental official says the office of Governor Christie pushed through a favorable settlement that potentially saved the oil giant ExxonMobil millions of dollars. Last week, New Jersey quietly agreed to accept just $250 million from Exxon after initially seeking $8.9 billion for environmental contamination more than a decade ago. The settlement came just 2 months after the state attorney general's office made a strong demand for the original $8.9 billion claim, saying in a court brief, quote, "The scope of the environmental damage resulting from the discharges is as obvious as it is staggering and unprecedented in New Jersey," unquote. Writing today in the New York Times, Bradley Campbell, the former commissioner of New Jersey's Department of Environmental Protection, says Governor Christie's chief counsel, Christopher Perino, quote, inserted himself into the case, elbowed aside the attorney general and career employees who developed and prosecuted the litigation, and cut the deal favorable to Exxon. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Nermeen Sheikh. Welcome to our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world.